I never thought letting my niece stay with me would change things. At first, it seemed simple, a kind gesture, a small favor between family members. She needed a place to stay while she went to school nearby, and we had a house big enough to accommodate it. But every night since she moved in, I've found myself standing in the hallway, staring at the light under her door, the soft, undimmed light, and I wonder, am I really helping her? Or am I just convincing myself that kindness can't hurt anyone? Our house isn't fancy. It's the kind of suburban home you drive past without noticing. For bedrooms, a front porch with 2 rocking chairs, and a lawn that always seems 1 week behind on mowing. But to me, it's more than walls and rooms. It's a map of our lives. Every hallway, every scuff on the paint, tells a story of who we've been as a family. I live here with my husband, Daniel, and our 3 kids: Emmett, 15, Eloise, 13, and Eden, our youngest, just 8 years old. If you walk through our house on any given morning, you'd hear a mix of chaos and routine, the blender roaring, Emmett slamming doors because he can't find his sneakers, Eloise complaining about breakfast, and Eden sitting cross-legged on the floor, quietly building a Lego castle in her pajamas. It's loud, messy, and most days exhausting. But it's ours. Eden, though, is the one who keeps me up at night. She's small for her age, pale and gentle, with a voice that sounds like she's always halfway between laughing and crying. For almost a year now, she's had terrible stomach issues, unexplained pain, nausea, nights when she wakes up crying or throwing up. We've been to doctors, done blood tests, scheduled more tests, but answers never come quickly when it's a child. Daniel tries to stay calm, but I can see the fear behind his eyes. He works long hours, and I've learned to carry most of the weight at home: the kids, the cleaning, the endless laundry, and the worry that keeps me awake long after everyone else is asleep. Still, somehow, we made it work. Every child had their own space, a small piece of privacy in a house that's always full of noise. Emmett's room was a half-decorated teenage caveman posters, half-eaten granola bars, and the smell of body spray that never fades. Eloise's room was neater, though her desk was always buried under sketchbooks and crumpled notes. And Eden's room, the smallest one, was bright and cluttered with stuffed animals and soft yellow walls that Daniel painted himself. For years, the house felt perfectly balanced, like a fragile system where everyone had their corner, their chaos. Until the day my phone rang. It was Sydney, my niece. She sounded cheerful at first, but there was a tremor in her voice that told me she'd been practicing what she was about to say. "Aunt May," she began. "She still calls me that, though no one else does. I got accepted into Ridgeway University. It's only about 30 minutes from you guys." "That's wonderful," I said, and it was. Sydney had always been the responsible one, bright, mature, and level-headed in a family that often wasn't. "There's just one problem," she said. "The dorms are crazy expensive. I was wondering if maybe I could stay with you guys for a while, just until I get on my feet." I remember glancing around the kitchen as she spoke: the stack of dishes in the sink, the basket of unfolded laundry, the homework spread across the table. The idea of adding another person to the chaos made my chest tighten. But at the same time, I couldn't imagine saying no. Sydney wasn't a stranger. She was family. Daniel and I talked about it that night. He leaned against the counter, sipping coffee, the same way he does when he's trying to stay neutral. "She's a good kid," he said. "But where would she stay? We don't have a spare room." I knew he was right. The house was already packed. Still, I heard myself say, "We'll figure it out. Maybe Eloise can share with Eden for a while." He frowned. "You know those two can't be in the same room for more than 10 minutes. He wasn't wrong. Eloise and Eden loved each other, but they were oil and water. One dramatic, the other delicate. Every attempt at sharing space ended in tears or slammed doors. We spent hours that night sketching possibilities, moving beds, swapping rooms, calculating square footage like amateur architects. Finally, we landed on something that almost made sense. Eloise would move into Eden's smaller room. Emmett would take Eloise's medium-sized one, and Sydney would share the largest room with Eden. It wasn't perfect, but it had logic. That room had 2 closets and its own little corner near the bathroom. Plus, it was on the opposite side of the house, a bit more private for a college student who probably didn't want to hear cartoon-themed songs every morning. I texted Sydney the news the next day. She replied almost immediately, "Thank you, Aunt May. I promise I won't be any trouble. I'll help around the house, whatever you need." At the time, her message made me smile. I had no idea how literal that promise would become. Sydney arrived on a gray Sunday afternoon, dragging 2 suitcases and a duffel bag that looked heavier than she was. The sky hung low, the kind that makes every sound in the neighborhood feel muted. Dogs barking, cars passing, children shouting somewhere far away. Eden spotted her first. She ran barefoot down the driveway, waving her arms like a windmill. "Sydney," she shouted. "You're here." Sydney dropped her bag and knelt down, catching Eden in her arms. For a second, the world around them froze. The two of them looked almost like sisters, same brown hair, same deep-set eyes, though Sydney's were a little tired, as if she hadn't slept much lately. "Hey, kiddo," she said, her voice soft but strained. "Wow, you got taller," Eden giggled. "You got older." Daniel laughed from the porch, and I smiled too. It was the kind of easy laughter we hadn't had in months. For a moment, it felt like Sydney's arrival might actually be a good thing. Inside, though, the energy shifted. Our living room, already cluttered with toys and laundry, looked even smaller once Sydney's suitcases were rolled in. She moved carefully, politely, as if afraid to take up space. I led her upstairs to the room she'd share with Eden. The space looked cozy, one bed against each wall, soft string lights above the window, a shared dresser in between. I'd spent all Saturday cleaning it, folding Eden's clothes, labeling drawers so they wouldn't fight over space. "This is perfect," Sydney said, placing her duffel on the floor. "I can't believe you did all this." "It's nothing," I said. "Just make yourself at home." She gave me that grateful smile that always makes you feel both appreciated and guilty. "I mean it, Aunt May. Thank you. I owe you big time." If only I'd known how much that debt would start to mean. The first few days went smoothly. Sydney slipped into the rhythm of the house like she'd always been part of it. She helped Eden get ready for school, offered to cook dinner twice that week, and even managed to get Emmett to come out of his room for more than 5 minutes, something I'd practically given up on. A tea night. I'd walk past her and Eden's room and hear them whispering. Their voices were low, comforting, Sydney telling stories about college life and Eden laughing at every word. It was nice. The kind of nice that makes you forget how fragile things are. Daniel seemed relieved too. He joked that we'd gained a free babysitter with a college degree in patience, but I noticed small things. Sydney stayed up later than everyone else. I'd wake at M to use the bathroom and see her light still on, her silhouette at the desk, scribbling in a notebook, headphones in, eyes red from the glow of her laptop. Once I asked if she was okay. She smiled and said, "Just catching up on assignments. You know how professors are." I nodded, pretending to understand. But the exhaustion in her face lingered, and so did the unease it gave me. By Thursday, the first cracks began to show. Eden started waking up earlier, sometimes at 5:30 a.m. and creeping into our room. "She's still sleeping," she whispered one morning, curling beside me under the blanket. "Sydney talks in her sleep. She says weird stuff." "What kind of stuff?" I asked. Eden frowned, thinking hard. "I don't know. Names, like, I didn't mean to," or "stop calling me." Sometimes she cries. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and kissed her forehead. "It's probably just dreams, honey." But later that morning, when I walked past their room to do laundry, I noticed Sydney's bed sheets twisted, pillow damp. Her phone clutched in her hand even as she slept. She looked vulnerable, like someone who'd been running from something. That night, during dinner, I finally asked her about it. We were sitting around the table, Daniel cutting chicken, Eloise poking at her vegetables, Emmett staring at his phone. The usual weekday chaos. "Sydney," I said casually, "Eden mentioned you've been having trouble sleeping. Everything okay?" Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Oh," she said, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just stress. I broke up with someone recently." "It's fine." The room went quiet for a second. Even Daniel looked up. Then Sydney laughed, too brightly. "Anyway, I'm over it. Just bad dreams, you know." I didn't push. Not then, but later, when I went upstairs to check on Eden, I saw Sydney sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone screen. The light from it cast a faint blue glow on her face. Her expression was unreadable, blank, almost empty. She didn't notice me standing there. Over the weekend, Sydney insisted on cleaning the house. "It's the least I can do," she said. She scrubbed the kitchen, organized the pantry, even vacuumed under the couch where the kids dropped popcorn. Tea first. I was grateful. Then I realized she was cleaning everything, even rooms no one had asked her to touch. She reorganized my spice rack alphabetically, rearranged the family photos in the hallway, washed the curtains in Eden's room and rehung them slightly higher, for better light. Daniel said I was overreacting, that she was just trying to help. But something about the intensity of it unsettled me. By Sunday evening, I found her in the laundry room, folding towels into perfect squares. Her eyes looked glassy, like she was somewhere else. "Sydney," I said gently, "you don't have to do all this. Take a break." She didn't look up. "I like keeping busy. It helps me think less." There it was, the first honest thing she'd said all week. That night, after everyone went to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the living room alone. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels too heavy. From upstairs, faintly, I heard Sydney's voice again. Not crying this time, but murmuring like she was whispering into a phone. I turned off the lamp and listened harder. "You can't call me anymore," she said, her tone sharp, hushed. Then silence. Then softly, "Please, just stop." The sound of the floor creaking followed her pacing. A muffled sob, and then nothing. I sat there in the dark, the wine untouched, staring at the ceiling. Something told me that whatever Sydney had brought into our house wasn't just her luggage. The first time it happened, I thought I was dreaming. It was around 2:47 a.m., and I woke to a faint sound, not loud enough to jolt me awake, just enough to tug me out of sleep. A voice, soft, faintly echoing through the vents. At first, I thought it was Eden. She often stirred at night, padding to the bathroom or whispering for help. But this wasn't her voice. It was older, lower, and filled with something that didn't belong in a child's room: fear. I pushed the blanket aside and sat up, listening. The house was still except for that faint hum. Sydney's voice. "I told you. I can't." Then silence. Then a muffled sob. I got up, opened the bedroom door, and walked quietly down the hall. The wooden floor creaked under my bare feet. The air smelled faintly of lemon detergent and sleep. When I reached the end of the hallway, I saw light leaking from under Sydney and Eden's door. A thin strip of pale yellow against the darkness. I hesitated, part of me wanting to knock, the other part knowing I shouldn't. Then I heard it. A man's voice, low, angry, coming from her phone. "You think you can just cut me off, Sid? After everything?" Sydney whispered back, "Please, stop calling me. You don't get to do this anymore." The man laughed, sharp, bitter. "You think you're safe there? You think they'll protect you?" My chest went cold, then a sudden sound, a thud. The phone hitting the floor, maybe. And then footsteps. Sydney pacing, her breath quick, ragged. "God, please," she whispered. "Just stop." And then silence. The next morning, Sydney acted as if nothing had happened. She made breakfast, flipping pancakes for Eden, humming softly to the radio. Her hair was tied in a messy bun, eyes hidden behind a layer of concealer that didn't quite hide how red they were. "Rough night?" I asked, pouring coffee. She smiled, tired, but polite. "Just couldn't sleep. Too much caffeine." I wanted to ask her about the call, about the man's voice I'd heard. But Daniel was sitting across the table reading the paper, and the kids were half listening. It didn't feel like the moment. So I let it go. For now. Later that day, while Sydney was out driving the kids to school, I went into the room she shared with Eden. I wasn't proud of it. I told myself I was just checking if Eden had enough clean clothes, but deep down, I wanted to see, to confirm what I'd heard. The room smelled faintly of mint shampoo and the lavender candle I'd given Sydney. The beds were neatly made. On Sydney's nightstand sat a photo, her, a young man, and a golden retriever on a beach. They looked happy. She was laughing, sun in her hair. The man had that easy kind of confidence, arm around her shoulders, smile wide, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. The kind of man who looked like he always got what he wanted. Behind the photo frame was a folded piece of paper. A letter, creased and smudged at the edges. I didn't mean to read it, but my fingers unfolded it before my conscience caught up. "You don't get to walk away, Sid. I know where you are. You can ignore my calls, but I'll find a way to talk to you. You owe me that much." I froze. The handwriting was sharp, hurried, the kind of writing done in anger. I folded it back, slid it under the frame, and stepped away, my hands trembling. That night, Eden had another episode. Around midnight, I heard her crying. When I got to the room, she was sitting up in bed, hands clutching her stomach, face pale. Sydney was beside her, holding a damp towel to her forehead. She threw up again, Sydney said softly, without looking at me. But she's okay now. Eden's eyes fluttered open. My tummy hurts, she whispered. I know, sweetie, Sydney murmured. You're brave. It's almost over. She said it like someone who had done this 100 times, calm, practiced, tired. I knelt beside the bed, brushing Eden's hair back. I'll take over, Sid. You should sleep. But Sydney shook her head. It's okay. I've got her. Her voice carried something final. Something that said don't argue, Dada, so I didn't. I stood there a moment longer, watching the way she held Eden gently, protectively, like a sister, or maybe like someone trying to protect a piece of herself. When I turned to leave, I saw Sydney glance toward her phone on the nightstand, the screen glowing faintly. And on it, a name I didn't recognize. Derek. 4 missed calls. Over the next few days, things got strange. Sydney grew quieter, jumpier. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched. She stopped using social media, claiming she was on a detox. One morning, while packing lunches, I asked, "Everything okay with your classes?" She froze mid-slice, knife hovering above the cutting board. Yeah, just group project stress. Then she smiled too wide, too forced, and changed the subject. That night, when she came home from the grocery store, her hands were shaking. She said she thought someone had followed her in the parking lot. Daniel brushed it off. Probably just nerves. She's not used to late-night errands, but I saw it. The fear wasn't nerves. It was recognition. 2 nights later, I woke again, this time, not to whispers but to screaming. Eden screaming. I bolted out of bed and ran down the hallway. Sydney's door was open, light flooding into the hall. Eden was sitting up, crying uncontrollably. Sydney knelt beside her, holding her face, whispering, it's okay, you're safe. I rushed in. What happened? Eden sobbed harder. The window. He was at the window. My blood ran cold. Who? She said she saw a man, Sydney said quietly, still clutching the child. Her voice trembled. But there's no one out there. I checked. I turned toward the window. It was open a crack, curtains blowing gently with the wind. Outside, nothing but the faint silhouette of trees. Daniel appeared in the doorway, groggy and confused. What's going on? Eden had a nightmare, I said quickly, my voice steady though my heart was racing. It's fine. Go back to bed. He nodded, mumbled something, and left. But when I turned back to Sydney, I caught her eyes wide, haunted. She mouthed something so quietly I almost missed it. He was here. After that night, Sydney refused to sleep without the lights on. I found her one morning sitting on the couch at dawn, knees pulled to her chest, staring at the dark window. When I sat beside her, she didn't look at me. Aunt May, she said softly, if someone called here asking for me, you wouldn't tell them where I live, right? The question hit me like a punch. Of course not. Why would you even ask that? She nodded slowly, biting her lip. Just promise me. I promise, I said. But Sydney, what's going on? Who is Derek? Her eyes filled with tears. It's over. It was supposed to be over. And then she stood up, walked to her room, and closed the door, locking it behind her. For the next few nights, sleep became a luxury in our house. Sydney stopped closing the blinds. She said the darkness made her feel trapped. Instead, she slept under the dim glow of a lamp, her face half lit, eyes darting toward the window every few minutes. Eden started having nightmares again, one so vivid she'd wake up screaming, saying she saw shadows at the glass. Daniel and I took turns checking outside, finding nothing each time but our own breath hanging in the cold night air. But even when nothing was there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The house felt different, the air thicker, like the moment right before a storm. One morning, Sydney didn't show up to drive the kids to school. Her car keys were still on the kitchen counter. Her phone was gone. Her bed wasn't made unusual for her. I tried calling, straight to voicemail. Daniel frowned. She probably just needed space, he said, sipping his coffee. But I could tell he didn't believe it either. Eden tugged at my sleeve. Mom, she whispered. Sydney said if she ever wasn't here in the morning, I shouldn't be scared. She said it'd be okay. I froze. When did she say that? Last night, Eden said softly. Before bed. Sydney came back just before noon. I heard the front door creak open and rushed out of my office. She was standing there, soaked from the rain, hair plastered to her forehead, her hands shaking. Where were you? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. I needed air, she said, dropping her bag to the floor. I just drove. I didn't realize how far I'd gone, but I noticed the faint scrape on her wrist, the smudge of dirt on her jeans, and the look, that same hollow look from before. Did something happen? I asked quietly. She shook her head. Just tired. Then she disappeared upstairs without another word. That evening, Daniel suggested maybe Sydney should talk to someone, a counselor, maybe even her parents. But the thought of calling her parents made my stomach knot. The last time we'd spoken, they'd accused us of exploiting her. They won't help, I said. They'll just make things worse. Daniel sighed. Then what do we do? She's falling apart, May. We can't just. A noise interrupted him. A faint knock, 3 slow taps on the front door. We both froze. It was nearly midnight. The porch light was off. Daniel stood, his jaw tightening. Stay here. I followed anyway. When he opened the door, the night air rushed in, cold, damp, empty. No one there, but on the doorstep lay a single white envelope, slick with rain. No return address, just Sydney's name written in block letters across the front. Sydney didn't want to open it. She stared at it for a long time, hands trembling. Finally, she whispered, if it's from him, I don't want to see it. Daniel looked confused. Who's him? Sydney's lips pressed together. No one. But I saw the truth flicker in her eyes before she turned away. Guilt, fear, and something darker, resignation. I opened the envelope myself. Inside was a single Polaroid photo of our house, taken from the street, the blinds open, light spilling out from Sydney and Eden's window, and on the back, written in thick black marker, nice view. See you soon. We called the police that night. They came, took the photo, asked questions. Was Sydney being stalked? Did she know who might do this? Sydney said no. Her voice was flat, distant. She didn't even look at the officer. After they left, Daniel tried to lighten the mood, saying, probably some prank. Maybe a bored neighbor kid. But Sydney just laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. You don't get it, she said quietly. He doesn't stop. The next day, she told me everything. They'd met last year at her college. Derek, older by a few years, charismatic, the kind of man who always knew what to say. At first, he made her feel seen, special. Then came the jealousy, the questions, the control. By spring, he was following her between classes, showing up uninvited at her dorm, sending hundreds of texts a day. She tried to break up with him in May. That same night, someone slashed her car tires. When she reported it, he vanished, deleted his social media, stopped showing up. Until the calls started again. He used to say, she whispered, you can't hide in your aunt's perfect family forever. Her voice cracked on the last word. I didn't know what to say. All I could do was reach for her hand and promise, you're safe here. But as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. Over the following week, Sydney barely left the house. She stayed close to Eden, almost protective to the point of obsession. Eden didn't seem to mind. She adored her cousin. They spent hours drawing, reading, baking cookies, but sometimes I caught Sydney watching the front window, her expression distant, paranoid. One afternoon, I found her standing outside in the driveway, staring at something on the mailbox. When I got closer, I saw what it was, a dead bouquet, roses, wilted, dark at the edges, wrapped in paper that had once been white, now stained brown from rain. Tucked inside was another note, you looked beautiful in the light. Sydney dropped it as if it burned her. Eden, who'd followed us out, looked up and said softly, Mom, is Sydney going to die? The world seemed to stop. Sydney's fine, I said quickly, forcing calm. She's just dealing with something scary. Sydney turned away, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. He wants me scared, she said. That's all he ever wanted. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet again. The kind of silence that hums in your ears. Around a.m., I got up for water. The hallway light flickered as I passed. From Sydney's room, I heard soft murmuring, not from her, but from Eden. I peeked through the cracked door. Eden was sitting up, staring out the window, her small hands gripping the blanket. Eden, I whispered. She didn't turn. He's outside, she said calmly. Sydney's talking to him again. My heart dropped. I rushed to the window, nothing there. Only rain sliding down the glass. When I turned back, Sydney was sitting up in bed, eyes wide, face pale. I locked the window, she whispered. But Eden said before I could finish. A sound cut me off, a tap, soft, deliberate, coming from outside the glass. Sydney's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Her nails dug into my skin. We both stared at the window. Another tap, then another. I pulled the curtain open and froze. A single handprint, pressed against the glass. Faint, wet, fresh. No one there. Sydney didn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither did I when the sun rose. She packed a small bag. I need to go, she said quietly. I can't stay here anymore. I begged her to wait, to call the police again, to let us help. But she just shook her head. If I stay, he'll come here. And if he does, he won't stop at me. She looked toward Eden's room then, eyes full of tears. I won't let him hurt her, she whispered. Not like he hurt me. And then she walked out, leaving the door wide open behind her. It's strange how silence can feel heavier than any scream. After that night, the one when I found Sydney crying in the dark, clutching Eden's stuffed bunny like it was a lifeline, our home fell into a fragile routine. The kind of routine that looks normal from the outside but trembles with something unsaid underneath. Sydney still woke up first every morning. She'd pack lunches, make pancakes, braid Eden's hair while humming something soft and old. She looked fine. She smiled. But there was a shadow in her eyes now, a quiet kind of alertness that hadn't been there before. The kind that comes when someone has learned to expect danger even when no one else sees it coming. I tried to talk to her about Derek again, but she brushed it off with that same shaky little laugh. He's gone, and live. He won't bother me anymore. I wanted to believe her. God, I did. But the way she flinched when the phone rang, or how she double-checked the locks every night, it told another story. Eden's health wasn't improving either. Some nights were easier, others were brutal. She'd wake up pale, sweating, clutching her stomach, whispering that it hurt too much. Sydney was always there first, holding her, whispering comfort, cleaning up after the sickness like it didn't break her heart a little more each time. There were nights when I'd find them both asleep on the floor beside Eden's bed, a small lamp still glowing, a towel folded neatly by their side. I wanted to tell Sydney she didn't have to do it all, but every time I opened my mouth, she'd look at me with those calm, tired eyes and say, "It's okay. She needs me." Then came the first incident. Small, almost forgettable, except it wasn't. One Thursday morning, Sydney's car door wouldn't open. The handle was jammed. When I went out to help, I saw it, a small line etched into the paint along the passenger side. A deep, deliberate scratch. Almost like someone had written something with a key, though the letters were too jagged to read. Sydney froze when she saw it. Her lips moved silently before she whispered, "He found me." I tried to stay calm. It's probably just some kid in the parking lot. People do stupid things, but Sydney shook her head. No, it's him. He used to do this small things first. Scratches, notes, just to let me know he's close. That afternoon, I called the local police. They took a report, but didn't sound particularly concerned. Could be vandalism, the officer said. We'll keep an eye out. Sydney didn't argue, but I could see her shutting down inside, retreating. That night she pushed her dresser against the bedroom door. She didn't think I noticed. I did. The next few weeks blurred together. Sydney still drove the kids to school, still laughed when Emmett made jokes, still sang along to the radio. But her eyes kept flicking to mirrors, corners, windows. One night, after putting Eden to bed, she told me about the last time she saw Derek before moving in. He'd shown up at her dorm around midnight, drunk and angry. He'd stood outside her door, knocking softly and whispering her name, over and over. "Sydney, I love you. You can't ignore me forever." When she didn't answer, he started crying, then screaming. Campus security came, and he ran. 2 days later, someone left a dead bird on her windshield. As she spoke, her hands trembled, and for the first time I saw how deep her fear ran. "He doesn't stop," she said quietly. "He just changes tactics." I promised her we'd protect her. We'd call the police again if anything happened. We'd make sure the kids were safe. But a promise means little when fear already lives inside your walls. Then, one evening in late September, Sydney didn't come home from class on time. Usually, she texted if she was running late. This time, nothing. I tried calling, no answer. I told myself not to panic, that maybe her phone died, or she'd stopped for groceries. But by PM, when the kids were in bed and the house felt too quiet, I felt that familiar pull in my gut. Something was wrong. At T9:23, headlights flashed across the window. I exhaled in relief until I saw the driver. It wasn't Sydney. It was a police cruiser. My heart dropped. The officer at the door was kind, but tired. He explained that Sydney's car had been found pulled over on the side of Route 39. The engine was running, lights on, driver's door slightly open. Her phone and bag were still inside, but Sydney wasn't. I think I stopped breathing for a few seconds. Was there a struggle? I asked, though my voice came out as a whisper. Nothing obvious, he said. We're not ruling anything out. That night was a blur of motion and stillness. Calls, tears, questions. The kids woke up at some point, Eden asking, "Where's Sid?" And I couldn't answer. The search began the next morning. Friends, classmates, volunteers. Flyers with her picture taped to streetlights, gas stations, the grocery store she loved. I didn't sleep for days. Neither did my husband. We told the kids she was probably just lost, maybe hurt, but deep down, we both knew better. 3 days later, a jogger found her. She was lying near the edge of the woods, less than 2 miles from where her car was parked. Alive, barely conscious, dehydrated, bruised. She couldn't speak when they found her. The hospital said she'd been drugged with something common but powerful. It would wear off in time. She was lucky to be alive. I remember sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, wondering if luck had anything to do with it or if Derek just hadn't planned to finish it that night. When she woke up, her first word was Eden, not mom, not help, just Eden. I didn't understand then, but I would soon. After she came home, things changed. She barely spoke. She stayed near Eden constantly, almost obsessively, sleeping in her room, checking on her every few minutes. She wouldn't let anyone else put her to bed. One night, when I tried to take over, she snapped at me. "You don't understand. She needs me." Her voice was sharp, desperate. At first, I thought it was trauma, that she was clinging to control after losing it. But then strange things began happening again. Notes slipped under the door, small noises outside at night, the sound of someone walking across the porch. Each time I'd rush out, but there'd be nothing. Sydney swore she saw someone standing by the woods once, just watching the house. I wanted to believe her, but when we checked the cameras, nothing. And yet, one night, I heard something too. A soft tapping on the window, like fingernails on glass. When I turned, I saw a shadow move across the yard, too fast to be the wind. The next morning, Sydney was gone again, but this time, she hadn't gone far. I found her sitting outside on the porch steps, barefoot, staring into the trees. She looked calm, almost peaceful. "He's waiting," she said, "but it's okay. I know what to do now." Her voice scared me more than any shadow could. I realized then that whatever Derek had taken from her, he'd left something behind too, a seed of fear that had rooted deep inside her mind. And now it was spreading, twisting her love for Eden into something fierce, obsessive, unrecognizable. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just a story about a stalker anymore. It was about what happens after the nightmare ends when you try to rebuild. But the cracks in the foundation have already started to spread, and I couldn't shake the thought that maybe the real danger wasn't outside our home anymore. Maybe it had already made its way in. The house didn't feel like ours anymore. Even after Sydney came home from the hospital, alive but changed, something in the air had shifted. It was heavier somehow, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. At first, I thought it was just fear. We'd all been scared, traumatized. I told myself that with time, we'd go back to normal. But normal never came back. Not really. Sydney began keeping strange hours. She'd sleep during the day and stay awake at night, sitting by Eden's door like a guard dog, a silent sentry who refused to rest. Sometimes I'd wake up around 3 in the morning and find her standing at the window in the living room, staring out into the yard, her hand pressed against the glass. When I asked what she was doing, she'd say, "Listening." Listening for what? She never said. Eden adored her though. She started calling her Sid sis instead of Aunt Sydney. It was sweet, at first, until I noticed how Eden clung to her, how she wouldn't go to sleep without Sydney there. One night, when I tried to tuck her in myself, she cried and screamed until Sydney came in, and only then did she quiet down, like nothing had happened. "She just feels safer with me," Sydney said softly, tucking Eden's blanket under her chin. That's all. But it wasn't just about comfort anymore. Sydney started locking the door to their room from the inside at night. I didn't notice until one evening when I went to check on them and couldn't get in. I knocked, and Sydney opened the door just a crack, her face pale in the hallway light. "We're fine," she said quickly. "Eden's asleep." And then she shut it again. Something in her eyes made me hesitate. It wasn't anger, it was fear. Not of me, but of something else. Something unseen. My husband tried to reason with me. She's been through hell, live. Give her space. But how much space do you give someone who's starting to build walls inside your own house? Then, strange things began happening again, small, unexplainable, but chilling in their own way. Footsteps in the attic when everyone was downstairs. A door creaking open in the middle of the night. The faint smell of cigarette smoke drifting through the kitchen window even though no one in the house smoked. Once, I found a dead mouse placed carefully on the back porch step, almost like an offering. I told myself it was a cat. I didn't believe myself. Sydney stopped going to her classes. She said she couldn't concentrate, that it wasn't safe to leave Eden alone, not even for a few hours. You have to understand, she told me one morning, her voice trembling. He's not done. I can feel him out there. I wanted to argue, but when I looked at her, really looked, I saw someone trapped in a loop of fear she couldn't escape. Her hands were trembling, her skin pale. Sydney, I said gently, the police looked everywhere. Derek isn't here. You're safe. She smiled then, a small, haunted smile. That's what he wants you to think. A week later, Emmett found something behind the shed. It was a pile of burned papers, college essays, photos, notes. All Sydney's. Someone had tried to destroy them. My husband thought she did it herself. I wasn't so sure. We decided to install cameras around the house. Motion lights, new locks, everything. Sydney didn't protest, but that night she moved Eden's mattress to the corner of the room farthest from the window. I caught her doing it and asked why. She said, windows are where they watch from. Then one morning, Eden woke up screaming. Her sheets were soaked, not with sweat, but with something sticky and red. For a moment, I thought it was blood, but it wasn't. It was paint. Bright red paint smeared across her pillow and wall. Someone had written one word above her bed. Mine. I froze. Sydney came running, saw the wall, and fell to her knees. It's him, she whispered. He found us again. We called the police. They came, took photos, asked questions. No fingerprints, no forced entry. Could be a prank, one of them said. Kids in the neighborhood maybe, but we both knew better. Sydney was shaking uncontrollably, muttering Derek's name like a curse. That night, she didn't sleep at all. None of us did. Every noise made us jump. Even the wind against the house sounded like footsteps. The next day, Sydney insisted on staying home with Eden while I went to work. I agreed reluctantly. Eden trusted her, after all. But when I came back early that afternoon, something felt wrong the moment I stepped through the door. The house was too quiet. I called out their names. No answer. I walked down the hallway toward Eden's room, and that's when I heard it whispering. Low, soft, rhythmic. I pushed open the door slowly. Sydney was sitting on the floor, rocking Eden in her lap. The curtains were drawn, the room dark except for the faint glow of the nightlight. Sydney? I said. She didn't look up. She's not safe when you're here, Sydney whispered. He knows when you leave, when you come back. He listens through the walls. I tried to keep my voice calm. Who listens? Sydney, look at me. But she didn't. She just kept rocking, holding Eden tighter. Eden looked at me with wide, glassy eyes. Mommy, she whispered. Aunt Sid says we have to stay quiet so he doesn't hear us. Something cold crept up my spine. That night, after the kids went to bed, I told my husband we needed to get Sydney help. Therapy, maybe even inpatient care. He hesitated. He didn't want to make her feel betrayed, but we both knew this couldn't go on. The fear had turned into something else now, something dangerous. The next morning, before we could talk to her, Sydney was gone. Again, her car was still in the driveway, her phone on the kitchen counter, but she wasn't anywhere in the house or yard. Panic set in fast. We called the police. They searched the woods, the nearby road, the old walking trail behind the neighborhood. Nothing. Hours passed. Then at sunset, she came back, covered in dirt, barefoot, her clothes torn. Her face was streaked with tears. I ran to her, grabbed her shoulders, and asked where she'd been. She looked right at me and said, I found him. Who? Derek. My stomach dropped. What do you mean, you found him? He's not out there, she said softly. He's in here. I froze. In the house? She shook her head slowly, tapping her temple. Here. He never left. He lives here now. Her voice was calm, almost eerily peaceful, like she'd accepted something that made no sense to anyone else. I didn't know what to do. That night, she locked herself in Eden's room again. When I checked on them later, both were asleep, curled up together on the floor. For the first time in weeks, Sydney looked almost serene, but as I turned off the hallway light, I noticed something on the wall beside the door, a small, fresh fingerprint, red, like paint, only this time, I knew it wasn't paint. For days after that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the fingerprint. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, a smear of ketchup from dinner, a trick of the light, anything that made more sense than what my gut whispered, that something inside our house had shifted again, something I couldn't explain. Sydney stopped talking almost entirely. She moved through the house like a shadow, always silent, always alert, as if she was listening to sounds only she could hear. Eden followed her everywhere, her tiny hand wrapped around Sydney's wrist, their movements synchronized like reflections in a mirror. I caught them whispering sometimes, voices low and urgent, words I couldn't quite make out. When I entered the room, they'd stop instantly, both of them turning toward me with wide, wary eyes. It was the kind of look you give a stranger who's walked into the wrong home. My husband tried to convince me that Sydney just needed rest. She's traumatized, he said. Give her time. But it wasn't just trauma anymore. It was something else, an obsession, maybe, or madness. She'd started drawing things, pages and pages of sketches, all of them the same, eyes, hundreds of them, some small, some enormous, all open and staring. She left them everywhere, on the kitchen counter, under Eden's pillow, taped to the mirror. I threw most of them away, but she'd draw more. They're watching, she said when I finally confronted her. I have to know where they are. Who's watching, Sydney? I asked, my voice shaking. She looked at me then, and for a second, her face softened, almost pitying. You still don't see him, do you? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the wind outside, the faint creak of the floorboards settling. Around I heard something else, soft footsteps. Not in the hallway, but above me, in the attic. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then came a slow dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. I sat up, heart pounding, straining to hear. It stopped as suddenly as it started. I wanted to wake my husband, but I knew he'd just say it was a raccoon. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. The next morning, I climbed up to the attic alone. The air was thick with dust, the sunlight slicing through the small window in pale stripes. Nothing seemed out of place, boxes, old clothes, Christmas decorations. But then I saw it. In the far corner, someone had drawn something on the wall. I walked closer, each step crunching softly on the old wood. It was another eye, larger than the one Sydney had drawn before, etched into the wood with something sharp. Beneath it, in shaky handwriting, were 3 words, "He is here." I stumbled back, my throat tight. I wanted to believe Sydney had done it herself, but there was something off about the writing. It was smaller, messier, almost childlike. I went downstairs and found Sydney in the kitchen, pouring cereal for Eden. "Why did you draw that in the attic?" I demanded. She looked at me, confused. "I didn't. Don't lie to me." "I didn't," she repeated, her voice rising. "You think I'd go up there? He's up there. I can hear him moving." Eden looked up from her bowl. "He talks to me sometimes," she said softly. The room went cold. "Who talks to you, sweetheart?" I asked carefully. She pointed toward the ceiling. "The man who stands in the corner." My husband tried to brush it off later, saying kids say creepy things all the time. But Eden had never been that kind of child. She was literal, sensitive, honest to a fault. If she said she saw someone, she believed it. And that terrified me. That night, Sydney moved both their mattresses into the living room, saying it was safer there. She made a little fort out of blankets, keeping the curtains drawn tight. I found her sitting cross-legged with Eden asleep beside her, a flashlight in her lap. "He can't reach her here," she whispered when she saw me. "He doesn't like the light." I sat down beside her, trying to steady my voice. "Sydney, you need to rest. You're scaring the kids. You're scaring me." She turned her head slowly, her eyes wide and unblinking. "You should be scared." Something in her tone sent a chill through me. I stood up and walked away, but even from down the hall, I could feel her gaze on me, watching, waiting. 2 days later, I came home early from work again. The house was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. "Sydney?" I called. No answer. "Eden?" Still nothing. I walked toward the living room, and my stomach dropped. The furniture was pushed aside, the curtains pinned shut with duct tape, and in the center of the room, Sydney had drawn a large circle on the carpet with chalk. Eden was sitting inside it, holding one of Sydney's drawings. Sydney stood nearby, muttering under her breath, "What are you doing?" I shouted. She looked up, eyes glassy, face pale. "It's for protection. He can't cross the line." I ran forward, grabbed her shoulders. "Stop this. There's no one here, Sydney. You're scaring her." Eden started crying. "Don't yell at her. You'll make him angry." I froze. "Who, baby?" "The man in the corner." I turned to look. There was nothing there. Just the wall, the shadows, the soft flicker of a lamp. But when I looked back at Sydney, she was smiling. A slow and settling smile. "You'll see him soon," she said softly. That night, I called Sydney's parents. I told them everything: her behavior, the drawings, the whispers. They promised to come the next morning to take her home, to get her help. I went to bed exhausted, emotionally drained, praying that we'd make it through one more night. At 3:07 a.m., I woke up to a sound I'll never forget. Screaming, high, sharp, primal. I ran down the hallway, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The living room was lit by the flickering lamp, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Sydney was standing in the circle again, holding Eden, both of them covered in what looked like dirt or soot. The chalk line was smeared, broken in places. She was sobbing, shouting something I couldn't understand. I grabbed her arm, trying to pull her away. "Sydney, what happened?" She turned toward me, and her voice cracked. "He was here. He tried to take her. I saw him. I saw him." Eden was shaking, crying into Sydney's chest. My husband came running, yelling, trying to calm them both down. But Sydney wouldn't let go. "You don't believe me," she screamed. "You never believed me. But he's real, Liv. He's real." I didn't know what to say anymore. I didn't know what to believe. All I knew was that the girl who had once been bright and full of life was now a ghost of herself, consumed by fear and delusion, or maybe something else. Something I couldn't see. We called the police again that night. They took her away for evaluation, gently, carefully. She didn't fight them. She just kept whispering as they led her out, "Keep Eden away from the windows." When the door closed behind her, the house fell into a silence so thick it felt like suffocation. I held Eden close, promising her that everything would be okay, even though I didn't believe it. And then, as I carried her to bed, she looked over my shoulder and whispered, "He's behind you." I turned, but there was nothing there, or at least, I think there wasn't. Months passed before I could talk about what happened that night without my voice trembling. Sometimes when I'm driving Eden to school and she hums to herself in the back seat, I think about how fragile the line is between safety and disaster. One small decision, a room assignment, a late-night phone call, a locked door can change everything. After Derek was arrested, Sydney stayed with us for another few weeks while we worked through the chaos. The police confirmed he had been following her for months, even before she moved in with us. He'd stolen mail, hacked her school account, watched our house. When they searched his apartment, they found photos of our home, notes about when the lights were on or off, and even sketches of the bedrooms. The thought of that still makes my skin crawl. But what haunted me most wasn't the danger, it was the realization that, in my effort to help Sydney, I had unknowingly placed her right in his reach. I had tried to be the aunt who offered stability, but I had brought her to the edge of something far darker. For weeks, Sydney barely spoke. She slept on the couch because she said the quiet of the bedroom made her feel trapped. Eden started having nightmares again. I could hear her tiny feet pad down the hallway at 2 or 3 in the morning, whispering, "Can I sleep with you, Mommy?" And I never said no. But slowly, life began to rebuild itself in quiet ways. Sydney went back to college. She moved into a dorm, this time small, noisy, crowded, but she said she liked it that way. She said she finally felt like she had control over her space. She started therapy too. Sometimes she calls me after her sessions, her voice softer, clearer, steadier. I can tell she's healing. Eden's stomach issues turned out to be mostly stress-related, worsened by late nights and anxiety. Once the house calmed down, her symptoms began to fade. Now, she laughs easily again. Sometimes I watch her and think, she'll never really understand how much she saved Sydney that night. Because if she hadn't woken up, if she hadn't screamed, we might not have known Derek was there until it was too late. And then there's me. I've thought a lot about what family really means. Not the Pinterest version, not the holiday card smiles or the perfect living room. Family is the sound of someone pacing outside your door and knowing you'll open it anyway. It's the AM conversations, the hard choices, the messy love that makes you want to both cry and fight and protect all at once. I used to think being a mother meant having all the answers, keeping everyone safe. Now I know it's mostly about showing up, even when you're terrified, even when you've failed before. Sometimes at night, when the house is still, I'll walk past that old bedroom, the one that used to belong to Emmett, then to Sydney and Eden. It's quiet now. The walls are repainted, the furniture rearranged. But if I listen carefully, I can still hear echoes: Sydney's soft laughter, Eden's sleepy giggles, the distant hum of the night. And in that silence, there's peace. Not the kind that forgets, but the kind that accepts. The kind that says, we survived. We grew. We loved. A few weeks ago, Sydney came home for the weekend. She brought flowers not for me, but for Eden. She handed them to her with a shy smile and said, "For my little hero." Eden beamed. Her arms wrapped around her cousin, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly whole again. I realized then that maybe this is what family really is. A long, imperfect story, full of mistakes, fear, forgiveness, and grace, but always, always worth telling, because in the end, it wasn't the danger that defined us. It was how we held each other through it, and that is the part of the story I'll never stop being grateful for.